Hellboy is a new remake based off of the two Guillermo del Toro films that came out around 2004 and 2008. Because Guillermo del Toro was requesting too much money for his budget for a third one, they decided to just scrap it all together and make a reboot, because that would be much more profitable than another one of those. Right? This film is about a director, Neil Marshall, trying to get his name out there a little bit more to make more horror films. And when he found out there was a job to direct the Hellboy remake, he thought it was perfect, right? Because he could utilize practical effects like Guillermo del Toro did, he could make it really spooky and kind of gory. But on his first day of shooting the movie, he fell flat on his face to the point where he had to be removed from the set, and then the studio execs took over. I'm just going to be upfront with you guys, I did not go into this movie very excited at all. I really enjoy the other two Hellboy movies. The first one's decent, that's more like Guillermo del Toro was kind of figuring out how to make these movies well. It's still a fine movie, but it's not perfect. Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, however, I think is a vast improvement, and I think it's a really strong movie, and it just made me so much more interested to see where else the story could go. Unfortunately, if you know the stories, the Hellboy movies that came out weren't very profitable. The first movie barely got to 100 million worldwide. And even the second one, though it made a lot more money than the first one, still didn't even double its budget. It pretty much leads me to believe that the only way Guillermo del Toro actually made a Hellboy 2 was either the first Hellboy movie got a cult following when it got on DVD, 2, he directed Pan's Labyrinth, which was a very successful, very critically loved film, and Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman have been stated that they've been wanting to make another Hellboy film. Even when Guillermo del Toro has been making a Pacific Rim, or a Crimson Peak, or The Shape of Water, he's still kind of talked about how he could still make a Hellboy 3, just the studio wasn't willing to give him enough money. So instead, the studio decided the best way to make another Hellboy film was to just scrap what Guillermo del Toro already did, remake it, $50 million budget. So of course, that left me a little upset because I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro and I love his vision in a lot of his films. When I heard that Neil Marshall was going to direct the film, though, I got some kind of hope restored because I hadn't seen his films at the time, but I heard he was a good horror director. I recently watched The Descent to kind of prepare myself to see if his directing style was at all utilized in the new Hellboy movie, and it's twisted AF, and I loved it. And after watching that, I was like, man, how could this go wrong? You know, Neil Marshall made this really twisted horror film with The Descent. He could actually make a really good Hellboy movie. David Harbour, who is cast in the role, sure, Ron Perlman will always be Hellboy, but he's a good actor. I'm sure he can pull it off. Ian McShane's in it too. He's a talented actor. They can pull this off, right? Unfortunately, no. I walked out of this film fuming. I was so pissed off at this movie. It's one of those movies where, while watching it, considering certain parts of the talent involved, I couldn't understand why it turned out so awful and almost amateur as far as directing and editing and writing goes. It's this movie's awful, dude. The first thing I want to talk about is Neil Marshall behind the camera. I could not sense really any real directing flair at all. After watching The Descent, there was really no trace of any Neil Marshall style in this film as far as intensity in the action sequences or the gore. It just felt all very lazy studio head made. A lot of people were really hyping up the fact that this was a R-rated Hellboy. A lot of people were now dissing on Guillermo del Toro's films because they were PG-13, and apparently PG-13 is for babies. We just want R for Hellboy. But after watching this movie, it's amazing to me how those PG-13 Hellboy movies, I think, are much more intense and better than the R-rated one. The R-rated movie feels more childish and just kind of lazy and stupid. Literally, the only way they try to make this R-rated is that they put in a bunch of blood, but it's not real blood, no corn syrup, anything like that. It's just CGI blood, so it's like automatically just this thing of like, oh, well, I'm seeing blood, sorta, but it doesn't really add to any intensity because I know it's fake. Another way they try to make this R-rated is that they pump up the swearing in this movie, and I'm not one of those guys who's like, you shouldn't swear in movies, like, do whatever you want, I don't care, I swear, everyone swears, who cares? But this movie does it so much to the point where it gets really obnoxious, and it feels like that's their only crutch to actually get a laugh, or to actually seem so intense and hardcore, is to just say, fuck. You know, and that doesn't really automatically make you badass or really R-rated edgy. It's just a word that people say. And if you say it too much, it can get really annoying. So unfortunately, as much as I do enjoy The Descent and what Neil Marshall did with that film creatively, it didn't feel like any of his creativity was really put into this film at all. There's literally only one scene, it's my only positive with the movie, where Hellboy visits this house that's like moving through this like foggy wood, and there's this creature named Baba Yaga in there. That was actually kind of cool. Like, the practical stuff was working for me, the set design seemed cool, and the potential story there that they were kind of hinting at seemed really freaky, and I liked it. Unfortunately, it doesn't last that long, and then once you see what they do with it later, in a post-credit scene, left me vastly disappointed and kind of confused as far as what they were even trying to do. Other than that one scene, though, there doesn't seem like there's much creativity to this at all. I know a lot of people like the Hellboy makeup that they have for David Harbour, but honestly, I didn't really care for it at all. You know, there was literally a shot of his face where he's like scraping his horn, kind of making it more flat, and for a couple seconds the camera lingered on it too long, and you could see the horn starting to move on his face. And then they cut again, and then it was perfectly still, so it just didn't seem like the makeup job for that was even all that good. It didn't feel like this was an actual creature that looked like this, it just felt like this is an actor under a bunch of makeup to me, trying to make it look more edgy because it's a little bit more scarry, because Ron Perlman's face is too smooth in those movies. So not a fan of the makeup job, and also David Harbour. I like him on Stranger Things, and he's showed up in a bunch of other movies in the past. Like, he's actually been in more stuff than you'd think. I'm a fan of his. Unfortunately, in this movie, I don't think he captured Hellboy at all. Ron Perlman had this really great gruff kind of sarcasm to him that actually makes him a good character, makes him funny. He's not one that just sets up zingers and like is overly plucky. That's the way they treat him in this movie, though. Almost like they're trying to put him into the MCU almost, as far as like plucky, funny characters that usually work out very well in those films because they're well crafted and well made. But in this film, a lot of it just feels very studio manufactured. Like, there's the soundtrack for this movie, and they play pop songs here and there, and it literally made my skin crawl because I immediately started thinking, these guys think they're Guardians of the Galaxy or Suicide Squad. That's exactly what they're trying to do, and it was so bad. Like, the music didn't even fit with any of the action sequences they had. It was literally just a ploy to make you feel like, I'm having a good time because they're playing a song I recognize. Please don't fall for that. If you're one of those people, please don't fall for that trick. And another problem I had with the Hellboy character is that after a while, he gets so annoying and whiny. I get that he lives with Ian McShane, his dad, and he's supposed to be a little bit more mentally immature, even though he looks like a grown man in a Hellboy costume, but Jesus Christ, they overdid it so much with the whining and yelling, complaining. It was so annoying. And speaking of Ian McShane, I thought maybe they could do the father-son dynamic maybe even better, because I think Ian McShane is a talented actor, but no, the father-son relationship, I think in the first Hellboy, is much better handled, and it's more delved into than this movie does. Ian McShane is a great actor, and it feels like they barely gave him anything to do other than he can make some jokes with Hellboy for a bit, and then cut him out for the rest of the movie, cut him out for the rest of the movie, let's bring him back here for a bit, and now let's jump forward and put him here, and then he's done. We're done. We don't need him anymore. And it felt like that father-son dynamic was sorely missing, and would have made the movie better if they had focused on it more. Same thing goes for the character Alice, played by Sasha Lane in this movie. Like, she has a really neat power, but number one, the CGI for said power, no. But also, her character isn't really given the right amount of time. They're focusing on Hellboy, Sasha Lane, and another guy as far as like this team that they're making, the Hellboy team that Hellboy leads. And I didn't feel anything for this team. Character-wise, I thought they're all very flat and just kind of basic and just poorly developed. Especially Ben Daimio, played by Daniel Day Kim. He was really bad in this, and I don't mean to just piss on him as an actor because I'm sure he just did the best he could, but the character he has to play here, they're missing a lot of intrigue, and they're missing a lot of the depth, because he's a guy who doesn't like Hellboy because I thought we were supposed to be fighting monsters, not working with them, and then later on in the movie, though, you find out that he has some sort of monster-esque ability, and then you start thinking, wait, why did you care so much about Hellboy being a monster again if you technically are one by your standards? There was literally a subplot that they started to introduce that made me think, oh, this guy is going to turn against Hellboy at some point, something's going to happen with their friendship, what's going to go down. But then when you see how it plays out, it literally just felt like we need this for some last minute tension, but we're not going to do anything with it. We're going to keep the audience guessing if we're going to do something with it, but we're not going to. And that just felt really lazy, man. Like, they take the time to actually set up something that could be mildly interesting, and then they're just like, No, we just needed that for, you know, like a little 10% extra tension for the climax of the movie. That's what I mean by this movie feels more like a studio head directed film. None of the choices made creatively feel actually very creative, or they don't feel like they were made by someone who's been behind other films before, like, as I said earlier, The Descent. And it's not just The Descent. Neil Marshall has made other films out there, so this isn't a guy who's fresh off the block. He's made one movie and now he's making a big blockbuster. No, he's made several other films in his past before. But for some reason, it feels like he was not even directing this film. It almost feels like it's just his name attached because they needed a name instead of just studio name. But I don't think any of these flaws should be surprising, mainly because one person was cast in this film that I think might just be the kiss of death. Milla Jovovich. Now, I'm not trying to diss on her personally. I'm sure she's a very nice person in real life. I don't know her personally, I can't say. But usually in some of the films I've seen with her, she has not been very good. Like, all the Resident Evil movies suck, and she's not very good in them. I'm trying to give Milla Jovovich the benefit of the doubt because I'm trying to think if I've actually liked her in anything before other than Zoolander 1. But I just don't really think she's that strong of an actress. And in this film, she's playing the villain, the evil witch, Blood Queen villain, and she's very hokey, and I could not get into her at all in this film. I thought her character was really poorly developed. This is another case where the character, if you spent more time with the development and the writing, could have made her something interesting, and if you worked with what Milla Jovovich was giving performance-wise, it could have worked better. But they really didn't do anything. It just felt like a typical kind of villain. Like, I'm going to take over the world because I have a backstory we're going to talk about for a second, and that's it. Oh no, things are going wrong now, I failed. That's the kind of villain we have here. There's even another villain that, if you focused on him more, could have been very interesting. There's like this pig sidekick she has that has been scorned by Hellboy before. Unfortunately, he doesn't feel like that much of a threat, and a lot of his dialogue was very annoying in my eyes and just not a very likable presence. None of the antagonists I thought left any kind of lasting impression on anything in the film, even though they're supposed to. And that leads me to another thing that doesn't help are the action sequences. I thought they were very poorly edited, choppily staged, and the CGI in a lot of them. Whew. There's a scene early on where Hellboy has to go out in the middle of the woods with these knights, and they're leading him to these three giants, and this is a good idea for an action scene, right? Hellboy is literally taking on three giants, and that should be really cool. Unfortunately, that's just a good idea in concept. When they actually get to it, though, the CGI looks horrendous. And the filming and editing for it looks really bad. There's literally a moment where David Harbour is running and the camera's moving around him and you can tell he's in front of a green screen. And whenever you can usually tell someone's in front of a green screen in a time where there are literally movies that create new worlds and you can't tell there's a green screen, but they're on Earth and you can tell there's a green screen, that's bad. But then there's other things that happen, like there's a moment where the three characters are going out in the woods trying to get to the Blood Queen's like tree on top of this hill. Then all of a sudden, like these, I don't even know, like ghosts start coming out of the ground, and the editing is so choppy, and the way they are staging it, it does, like, you don't even really know if it's that much of a big deal that these things are coming out of the ground. Like, there's just really no sense of tension anywhere, because you're either constantly reminded that you're looking at a fake visual effect, or you just don't really care for what the filmmakers are doing staging all these action sequences. You've seen it much better before. There are better CGI fights out there than just this. And I think I've hinted at it a little bit, but I think the biggest issue I have with this movie is that the $50 million budget has enabled them to have the worst visuals in recent memory. I find it really funny how the Guillermo del Toro Hellboy movies are more focused on the practical effects, and they've only really utilized CGI when they've had to. In the first Hellboy movie, it hasn't aged that well. Second movie, though, it still looks really good. This one, though, is not going to age well past a day. The visual effects suck, and they over-rely on it too much. Like, literally, the only practical effects they have are, like, the Baba Yaga scene, and then Hellboy. But even that doesn't even look that good, so what's the point? Visually, this looks like a frickin' nightmare to look at. Like, there's so much stuff that I'm looking at, and I'm like, this isn't even rendered right. Like, they didn't even, they stopped it too soon. There's literally a moment where a character turns into a cheetah, and it looks so bad. But on concept, I could see it working, because you see, like, the claws coming out of his nails, and it's like, oh god, that's actually really gross in concept, but when you actually see it in the movie, it's like, wow, look at those CG claws coming out of those CG hands that he has now, and oh, CG blood again. And when you actually do see the cheetah fully transformed and then in action, it literally looks like a PlayStation 1 game. That's the entire movie. This entire movie feels like a PlayStation 1 game that you're stuck in. And the final nail in the coffin for me was the ending of this film, where they hint at a character that wasn't in this film, but we know of their existence because of the Guillermo del Toro movies. They hint at that character's return for the sequels, and they even have post-credit scenes that are some of the worst post-credit scenes I've ever seen in my life. Jesus Christ, why'd I stay for them? This movie's awful. I freaking hate this thing. Other than one cool practical effects scene with Baba Yaga, I couldn't get into this thing at all. I didn't think they captured the character of Hellboy right. I don't think they captured the villains right. I don't think they captured Ian McShane right. I don't think they captured the rest of Hellboy's team right. I don't think they captured the world right at all. It feels like it's missing a lot of details that Guillermo del Toro did much better. The fact that they canceled his third film just to make this a lazy hack fraud job of a remake baffles me beyond belief. Literally, more people probably would have seen Hellboy 3 at this point. Do you know how many people have been clamoring for that at this point? Guillermo del Toro is a big name right now. He literally just won the Oscar for The Shape of Water last year. But for some reason, like, oh no, we can't bring him back. He's probably too busy. We're not going to wait for it. We're just Hellboy remake, whatever. Frick it. Who cares? $50 million. Pick a guy who makes horror films on a small budget. Neil Marshall, here's your $50 million, make us a movie. And by you make a movie, I mean let us make the movie, and then you just stand there and act like these are all your creative decisions. I've got to give Hellboy a D-, guys. There's literally only one scene I really thoroughly kind of liked. Everything else I thought visually looked awful. The characters were not well developed at all. There's no real sense of a directorial flair. The writing is so lazy and the story is so formulaic that I literally almost fell asleep near the beginning. There are literally certain times where I almost fell asleep at the beginning of this film. That's how kind of boring and been there, done that this whole story kind of feels like. Visual effects suck. Action scenes are poorly edited, staged, everything. This movie doesn't work at all. I don't want to see more Hellboy movies out of this series. I hope it flops like it currently already is. I hope there's no worldwide spike and they're like, oh, we gotta make another one now, please. No, no, don't see this movie. It is so bad, and it's an insult to what Guillermo del Toro had previously done. I think that's the worst part about this whole experience, is that Guillermo del Toro had the idea to make a third film. People were behind his vision. And then Lionsgate was just like, yeah, but that seems too expensive. Let's make a $50 million hack fraud one. I'm crushed. I'm crushed. Oh, and one other thing, why Regal? Why did you leave the subtitles on throughout the entire movie? Like, literally the movie starts, Ian McShane starts narrating, and the subtitles came up, and I literally looked behind at the projection booth. I was like, oh god, is this guy's first day or something? What's going on? No one fixed it! Subtitles just stayed throughout the whole thing. That has never happened to me before. I was in disbelief. But anyways, if you've seen Hellboy, the remake, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.